Hi class, and welcome to day 2 of our online and enrichment and review period. I know I received some feedback and comments about the beard, and I just figured that I would address that right away, since that's probably among the more important thing on everybody's mind. The Friday that we last had school, 2 weeks ago, was the last time I shaved, and for whatever reason, when I got up on Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, neither of those days did I feel compelled to shave, and I thought, maybe I'll just grow a beard for the duration of this crisis. And I've had the crisis beard going now for a little bit over 2 weeks, since now we're on Tuesday of the 3rd week since we've been in school. Now, while my intention was to keep it growing for this whole crisis, we'll see if that actually happens, because it's sometimes a little bit more annoying than you might think. Anyway, that's what's going on there. Will I make it through the crisis or not? You could take bets on that. Just don't actually take bets on that, please. So yesterday, what we looked at was how history could help us during more modern times. And we compared the Spanish influenza of 1918 with the current situation going on now with COVID-19. And we see that while history doesn't repeat itself, there are certainly parallels, right? There are certainly similarities between historical events, and studying the history of those events could help us understand what we might need to do, or what we can do to kind of make our lives better in the here and now. And we're really seeing a lot of that today, right? A lot of responses by government officials and healthcare agencies regarding the current COVID-19 crisis have drawn on successful responses that took place during the 1918 crisis. So even though that was over 100 years ago, it is really still helping us out today, which is a pretty remarkable thing about history. Now, as we progress through these review and enrichment days, I want to try to think about some other times in history also that we could perhaps draw on that have lasting implications and lasting impact that could help us today. Things like the Great Depression, for instance, which is something that I think we might get into later on this week. Or if we're still doing this next week, we'll do that next week. But today, I want to kind of take a step back and talk once again about primary sources. And I say once again because those of you in my 8th grade classes likely and hopefully remember me talking about primary sources before. And we've read a decent amount of them throughout the year. For those of you watching in 7th grade, yes, we dealt with some primary sources, not as much as the 8th graders, but one that I'll mention in just a moment should spark your memory, because we definitely looked at it in 7th grade as well. So primary sources, those are, just for a review, those are sources that were written during the time that we're studying by people who were either there or had first-hand knowledge. For instance, a speech from a famous leader or politician's example of this. I initially thought that I was showing an image of Martin Luther King giving his famous I Have a Dream speech, but kind of looking at the background there, I'm not sure if that's it, and I don't think it is. And one thing to know about Martin Luther King Jr. is he gave a lot of speeches, right? I mean, part of the way that he spread his message consistently during that phase of the civil rights movement was by giving speeches at rallies, and he held a lot of them. And the I Have a Dream speech, which we watched in class back in January, that just happens to be the speech that he gave in front of the largest crowd, and is definitely the most well-known in history. But other examples of primary sources include things like personal journals, diaries, newspaper coverage of events. For instance, yesterday we looked at, on the slideshow, I showed you 2 front pages of 2 newspapers that were discussing government responses to the 1918 pandemic. Those were primary sources about that event, just like some of the news coverage that's going on today will end up being primary sources of the current pandemic that's happening. Other examples include things like letters and correspondence. Right? You don't hear about people writing letters often today, but letters prior to the invention of the telephone and when more long-distance communication became more instant, right, letters were the way that people communicated over distance. So letters really helped document historic events, especially events that happened like overseas, things like World War I and World War II, and even more modern conflicts where soldiers and other people abroad would send physical handwritten letters home that help inform the historical record. Right, but other forms of correspondence that are used more commonly today, things like email and even text messages, right, they could help inform historians years from now of what people were doing and what people were thinking in our own time. Government records like Supreme Court decisions and Supreme Court opinions, congressional records, things written by the president's office. Those are all government records that help inform people of what happened in the political history of the times, right? And in more modern history, we have photographs and video footage and things like that that could help show us. Like, so for instance, I put the photo of Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech up on the top and listing the speech itself as a primary source, but even the photograph of him giving this speech is a primary source. It tells us a little bit about his demeanor. It also tells us a little bit about the types of crowds that would go and see him. You kind of see a diverse crowd in the background. The people close by are all very well dressed, right? That tells us some things about the vibe that was going on at the time. Now, historians make history, right? They create things that we call secondary sources. And when documenting history, historians rely on primary sources to find out what happened in the past. And what they do is they look at all of the available primary sources, as well as what other historians wrote about the subject, and they develop what's known as a narrative. A narrative is basically telling a story. It's somebody's best guess as to what happened in the past. And here as an example, I put one of my favorite books by a brilliant author named Glenda Gilmore called Defying Dixie, The Radical Roots of the Civil Rights Movement in 1919 to 1950. I chose this example because out of all the many history books I've read, Gilmore tends to draw on more primary sources than any other author. When I say looking at all of the available primary sources, she came as close to seeing and using all of them as any author that I could ever think of. She traveled abroad. She went to foreign archives in the Soviet Union, or in Russia rather, and South Africa and other parts of the world that related to this book. She conducted lots and lots of interviews with people that were alive back then and the relatives of people that were alive back then. She compiled a mass of letters and essays and newspaper articles and everything she could find to create a narrative of what happened in the past between 1919 and 1950 as it related to the civil rights movement of that time. And that's what historians do. Now, what we are going to do today, and really I'll let you work on this today, tomorrow, I could extend a little bit further into the week because, like I said, I want this to be a more laid-back approach. This isn't replacing what we would do in the class. This is just kind of enrichment and reviewing. But you're going to choose any event in history that interests you. It could be stuff that we talked about in school, like ancient Rome and ancient Egypt and Greece and the Byzantines, the Caliphate, whatever you'd like. But it could also be something that you would just want to learn more about. Right? It doesn't have to go along with our curriculum. I would actually encourage you to pick something from more modern history, right? Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement are two examples. But even like the 9/11 terrorist attacks and the war on terrorism, or the 2008 recession, right? Those are all recent historic events that there are a lot of primary sources out there. And whereas in class we've read primary sources on things like ancient Rome and ancient Egypt, and those are kind of hard to find, because they were written thousands of years ago. If you choose a more modern topic, not only are you going to find way more examples and more readily available online, but you're also going to find more engaging examples, things like audio and video recordings, stuff where you can actually hear the figures that you're studying about speak and talk and see them do things, as opposed to just reading the writings from them. And then once you've picked the topic, you're going to go into Google Classroom and you're going to follow the instructions on the assignment that I have posted there for you. I know you're already in Google Classroom, but just go back, get out of this video once we're done here, and check that out. Basically what you're going to be doing is finding a primary source on a topic of your choice, and then answering a handful of questions about that primary source to show why it's important in understanding the event that you choose. More importantly, I want you to know that you are right now, as you sit here doing this, a primary source, because you're living in a time unlike any other in recent history. Right? In my 16 years of teaching, there's never been a time where we've been sent home for multiple weeks and told to start instructing students online. Right? That hasn't happened. And I don't think that's happened really anywhere in history that I know about. So just that is historical, let alone the vast historic events that are unfolding around us now. Right? Information that's being recorded now in any way, shape, or form can be used by historians later to document what happened at this time. And historians aren't only going to be looking at things like New York's Governor Cuomo or President Trump and what they're saying about these events. They're not going to only be looking at disease experts and what they're saying about these events, or Prince Charles in England and how he's struggling right now after contracting the coronavirus. Historians are interested in what ordinary individual people like you and I are doing and thinking as we deal with this situation. And in recognition of that, I really encourage you to do what I have on the screen here. And I'm also going to list that on Google Classroom for you to give you some ideas. And this isn't something that you necessarily have to submit. If you want to share your ideas with me via email, please feel free to do that. If you want to share things with the class, feel free to do that as well on Google Classroom. But I really encourage you to start writing down on a daily basis, write down or type down your thoughts. What are you thinking about this current situation? What are you doing to handle it? Are you saving the world by sitting on your couch and watching Netflix, like I've seen in some memes, and I think there's some truth to that. But document it. Document what you're doing. Talk to your family members about it. Right? Interview them. Use your phone to take videos. You could record your thoughts that way using whatever audio-visual technology you have, or you could type things down, write them down, whatever you want. But keeping a day-to-day journal about this event in itself is a primary source, and it's something that many, many years from now, when your children, grandchildren, etc., are learning about these events in school, learning about this as part of history, which they will. Well, it's not the nicest part of history. It will be part of history. While they're learning about that, you'll have something direct to share with them about what you went through and about what you were thinking at the time as a young person living through history. So with that, I'll let you have to it. I hope that you are all safe and well. And again, please don't hesitate to shoot me an email or contact me through Google Classroom, because I'm happy to help as you tackle your new type of coursework. And with that, enjoy the rest of your Tuesday.